So hello there. Today we will have a special guest, and he is from Ukraine originally. We studied together at Diplomatic Academy a year ago, and I will take this as a reunion. We will be discussing very sensitive and contemporary issues: the war, the invasion of Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and its ramification to the region, to Ukraine, to the region, and to the global order itself. So now I am bringing you the voice from the field, or the voice of the people, someone who knows the inside out of what has happened, what is really going on, and most probably what will happen in the weeks or months to come. So with that, welcome Igor to the podcast. I know that you have a very tight schedule, and it is also Saturday afternoon, and you also have some other commitments. So thank you very much, and on behalf of our listeners. With that, would you mind to introduce yourself briefly, and then we can get into our conversation? Thank you very much.
Hello, our dear listeners. My name is Yegor Shestunov. Yes, we studied together at the Diplomatic Academy, together with a friend of ours. I graduated from the Environmental Technologies and International Affairs. And ever since then, I have been working on documenting certain events that happened in Ukraine, and working as a journalist time to time as a freelance journalist. Not much to tell, so feel free to start the questions.
Yeah, so that's awesome, Igor. I mean, you have been in this very difficult moment for the last, I would say, 6 or 7 months. And if you remember, we had a very brief discussion right before the invasion of Ukraine, or before the start of the war, if you remember, at the end of January. I asked you what would happen, whether Putin meant what he was saying, and you said yes, most probably he's going to do it, and the international community was not ready for that. And it turned out to be what you just expected to happen. So now here we are after 6 months of brutal war, and the suffering and the pain of the people. I really feel your pain, not because that I am only I'm sharing the same experience in my country. We have a civil war which is raging for the last 2 years, which you might be aware of. But beyond that, I have witnessed. Um, it's fair to say that the international community has been showing some solidarity, and the level of solidarity is commendable when it comes to the war in Ukraine. And so that being said, can you walk us through how we get here? What really went wrong over the last few years or decades? Were there red flags where the international community would have acted, or put otherwise? Um, what do you think are the main structural causes of this invasion or war?
I would say that what is going on in Ukraine is nothing new if you compare it to what's been going on in Georgia a few years prior, in Chechnya or in Pridnestrovye. Technically, you have a system, and you had conflicts that have unfolded systemically. I mean, if we go back in time, if we go to the 2007 Munich conference, when Putin first made his announcement that technically he's bringing back the old world blues. I think that was the turning point, and I think it was just not taken seriously enough. I mean, if we just focus on Ukraine alone, of course, the events of 2014 were pivotal, because you had biggest land grab, or the first land grabs in Europe since World War II, and that went. I wouldn't say that went unnoticed, but there weren't any punishments, and so what we have today is the direct consequences of us not paying enough attention, and to us not responding to the events that happened a few years prior. So I wouldn't say that there was anything per se wrong. We ended up exactly where we're supposed to be. I think this is exactly what we come to. If you don't solve the smaller problems will ultimately become much bigger problems. And this is what we have right now, the war in Europe.
Is it fair to say the war is inevitable?
You mean this specific one?
Yes, this specific war, the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, and the fact alone that it's going on right now means exactly that. All along, we were slowly approaching step by step the world of today. I mean, some of the most talented Ukrainian politicians, when Maidan was happening, they already pretty much said we're going to have a war with Russia, and very few believed. I mean, even so many years later, if you talk to Ukrainians in January, December, I mean, some of them would just call it a bluff. They would say, no, it cannot be. I mean, yes, of course, we have the local disturbances, so to say, but that's natural. I mean, how can Ukraine have a war with Russia, or how can Russia have a war with Ukraine? I mean, all the people that have died on the Soviet side during Second World War, if they would be reawakened, and if they would see what's going on right now, I mean, what would they say? They would probably not believe. And very few did believe, but there were those who said, yes, the war with Russia is inevitable. And it turned out they were right. And those who paid close attention, they knew what's coming. Maybe not everyone expected the full scale of invasion, because if you might recall, on the 24th of February, you didn't just have a shellings and bombardment of all of the larger cities of Ukraine, and this was something very, very few anticipated. That said,
Yeah. So just building on your last statement. So if we go back in history, not long history, the fact that the Ukrainians and Russians have, of course, obviously a close relationship. So what do you make of the Putin's claim? It's not only Putin's claim, but generally the Russian elites claim that Ukraine and Russia are the same in a sense, and to the extent of abrogating the sovereignty and the independence of Ukraine. So yes, on the one hand, it was very unlikely to see these two countries, brotherly and sisterly countries, at least before the invasions. It was unreasonable or irrational to believe that. But now there is a claim, and there has been a claim that these two countries have been the same, and so the Ukrainian independence has been compromised, not only through invasion, but through discourses. So what would you make of that?
The very, very easy difference between Ukraine and Russia is that people of Ukraine, they think that what's going on in politics is concerning them first and foremost. In Russia, there is this common position that whatever goes on in politics, I'm not a politician. I don't have a say. Who am I to tell politicians, the professionals, what to and what not to do? In Ukraine, it's very different. Ukraine has questions. Ukraine has flaws, no doubt in that. But people overall, they are much more enthusiastic about the change. They want to participate, and they want to be part of the political life. And of course, you have to understand that Ukraine is a democracy after all. It's maybe we have problems with corruption, maybe there are certain flaws, but Ukraine nonetheless is a democratic state. Russia, one could go as far as say Russia never was. For very many Russians, acting politically is a taboo. Maybe it's because people are still traumatized, and yet, yeah, and nonetheless. You know what? If you want, we can come back to this specific question a week later, and I will be much more prepared for this one. But I don't want to misinform, and I don't want to lie.
Yeah.
Sorry
So I
about
mean,
that.
thank you very much for your honesty. I mean, you could have skipped the question, but still, for me, was fair enough that Ukraine is not Russia, and the major difference lies in the democratic culture the two countries have been exercising, which is adequate enough for me. But in any case, we will come back to this specific issue of state identity itself, including the democratic culture and the everyday politics you just mentioned. So in Ukraine, there is everyday politics where there is active participation of the citizen on the issues that affect them, on the major issues of concern for them. But so with that summary, we may come back to these particular issues maybe in part 2 of the episode. So let's move on to the next question. So at around the beginning of this war / invasion, President Putin came up with a very sweeping claim or military plan, which is a special military operation, which was not going to last more than 3 weeks or a month, if you remember. So now he is there. His army have been in Ukraine for the last 5-6 months, and as we hear from the international media and even those people on the ground, that Ukraine have been recapturing some of the territories it lost during this war over the last few months. And now, I think it was 3 days ago, where President Putin made a new press statement whereby he called upon the reservists, which amount to around 300,000 soldiers. So what was the setbacks? Or can we even say it is a setback? Is it a miscalculation? Or and is it because of the heroism shown by the people of Ukraine, because they have the cause to, of course, to fight for, because they have to defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity and independence?
Well, let's start off with mobilization. They did it because this is the only thing that's left. They've exhausted other potential measures, and they're running out of people. And this is technically, there were people like Igor Girkin. This is the person who is, according to the decision of the International Court, is partially responsible for shooting down the MH17 Boeing jet in 2014 in eastern Ukraine. He has been super radical, and he has been criticizing the Russian government's decision making for months, if not longer. And he said that mobilization is imminent, and not just partial mobilization, a total mobilization. If Russia wants to win the war, mobilization is imminent. And however, he was talking about the imminent mobilization months ago, because who are they mobilizing now? And I want to make it very clear. There was this unwritten agreement between people of Russia and the Russian state. So people of Russia, they are fine with whatever special military operation is taking place, as long as they are not part of it. Now that they suddenly are, the tables are turning, and some say that the number may exceed 1 million people, and that would be reasonable for the situation Russia finds itself in terms of Ukrainian conflict. They do need 1 million people to fight. You have to understand that Ukrainians are very motivated. Ukrainians are fighting for Ukraine and for their very cause. I think it was Blinken, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. He said that if Russia stops fighting, the war will be over. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. And I agree. Ukraine is motivated, and much more motivated than Russians who don't know why is it they need to fight. Yes, I mean, there are the stories about NATO expanding, and we can talk about that later. Russia right now resorts to mobilizing people who work in IT, people who worked in banks. So pretty much they are so desperate for people, they are mobilizing literally everyone they can. But my question here, I mean, what can they do? Can they actually like do anything? I mean, let's imagine you are suddenly given a gun and you are told, okay, I mean, go rush, or you're given a knife. I mean, ever since the beginning of the war, Ukrainians would constantly make remarks about how bad the equipment Russians are coming to Ukraine with is. Sometimes they lacked winter clothing. Sometimes they lacked ammo. Sometimes they didn't have the very basic things to survive, like aid kits. And that was back then. What's going on now and the scale at which one is expecting to throw naked bodies of people who never fought in war and were never agreed to fight in a war is immeasurable. I think it's going to be very tragic. I think that this is going to result in huge loss of life because Russia will not have time to train people. It's not enough just to mobilize. Ideally, you mobilize 2 or 3 months prior so that you can teach people how to handle themselves, how to use a
Then,
weapon.
maybe if I just interject here, because you um, incidentally raise a very important issue, which strikes into the heart of why we are having this war of invasion. I mean, what does Russia need to accomplish in Ukraine? Because then you will also reflect upon, you also touch upon the role of NATO as a pretext for the invasion of Ukraine. So maybe if we just start with the first one, what is President Putin plans to, or was planning to achieve by invading Ukraine? What is the specific purpose then? We know that the Ukrainians are fighting to defend their sovereignty, their freedom, and the liberty and independence. And yes, I was listening to Blinken. You are right, where he rightly said so about the difference as to the cause of the war. So, what was he trying to accomplish, and what victory? What sort of victory is it for him? When can we say that he accomplished something, or it has been a failure? So, what is your take on this issue?
I would say he, for the most part, he accomplished the opposite of what he wanted. I mean, if first of all, Russia officially has changed more than a dozen of times the original intentions. One day they would say they're fighting NATO and fighting NATO expansionism. The next day they would say they're trying to protect the Russian speakers in Ukraine. The very next day, they would say they are fighting the Western hegemony and they are fighting to destroy the domination of the West, whatever West possibly means. So we are. I mean, it's okay to be puzzled because not very many may understand what is it Russia wants. But technically, arguably, Russia was successful at isolating itself. I think that for a totalitarian regime, the gift is when you are left alone and isolated, left to yourself. I would say that the solitude Russia faced is unseen. A country which is the most sanctioned in the world, you have shortages of printing paper, you have shortages of computer chips. Russian planes in Aeroflot are flying with broken equipment, so this is a matter of time until planes start falling. So there are videos that people post on internet, and pretty much captains of aircraft themselves are pretty much saying, we are flying broken planes, but there is no way for us to repair them. So I think that the magnitude of what's to come is yet to be seen. But one could say that if you have a country which is supposed to be a sanctuary or an experiment of isolation, that would probably be an accomplishment, because to Putin, this is a gift. You can do
How,
what you want.
but how did that isolation, speaking of isolation, how did the isolation came about? Is it because of the solidarity and the unity among the Western world, or is it because of the effectiveness of the sanction?
I would say that everything is interconnected. This for sure is part of it. I would say that another part is that I mean, look at the gas situation right now. Yeah, you don't just have the sanctions. You have a Russian state who's threatening to cut off gas. This kind of behavior only fuels isolationism. Everyone's burning bridges, but Russia is doing so much more that the rest just ultimately have to comply. I mean, if Russia says, sorry, our pipes are broken, we cannot deliver you gas anymore, implying that one should lift off sanctions, this can be considered as a provocation. And of course, if you have consolidated position on the war in Ukraine, chances are you will not agree to that. So this isolation is a product of behavior of first and foremost Russia, because it has been my impression that up until 24th of February, one could forgive Crimea, one could forgive Boeing MH17, one could forgive all sorts of war crimes that happened on Ukrainian soils. But now, after everything that was committed in Europe, I argue that up until 24th of February, Russia was given chances to stop it and to change, but these chances were ignored. I wanted to come back to the original intention as to why did all of this begin, and what is the purpose?
Maybe before that, if you
Yes,
are generous enough,
sure.
just quick interjection here again. So generally, are we not in an economic war where everyone is left to his own means? Just reflect upon that and then proceed to the next topic. Thank you.
I would say that it, of course, depends partially on the definition of what is economic war. But I would say that in a complex world of today, where we all pretty much established the unified capitalist system, any kind of war ultimately becomes the economic war. One could as well argue that buying Russian gas is fueling the war, and maybe if suddenly no one bought the gas anymore, there would be no money to have a war in Ukraine. From this point of view, of course, Russia's doing her part in this economic war. But if we just examine Europe or what's going on with the economic systems closely, I mean, you have a situation when Russian citizens, if they have money in Russian bank accounts, they can no longer pay abroad. They can no longer get money from the ATMs. One can't easily nowadays transfer money from Europe to Russia and back. And all of this is very serious. I mean, just think back how easy things were. I mean, in a world so globalized and connected, when you have, well, as free as it once was, the movement of people, movement of capital, international firms, international banks, of course, this will have an effect. I just think that in the context of today, any kind of war of such magnitude is the economic war.
That's an excellent perspective, in a sense that it all depends on how we define economic war and what it entails, and of course the global world order we live in. So much so that everything is connected to everything else, and we do not even at times tell where one line ends and the other one begins. So many experts and pundits are saying this war is bigger than Ukraine and Russia. We cannot shy away from the geopolitical aspect of the war itself. So there is a geopolitical issue, and some people are even calling it the new Cold War in the making. In a sense that this war is not between Russia and the Ukraine per se. So, but generally, I think you are aware of where I'm heading to, and this is claims that there is a geopolitical aspect, and the war is not confined to the Ukrainian territory, or it's not even about Ukraine, as such.
I think it's necessary to understand that if it wasn't for Ukraine, the war would continue on the European soil. It would continue in Poland. It would continue in Estonia, potentially elsewhere. I mean, I think that the Munich speech Putin gave in 2007 was exactly to challenge the global order and exactly to reestablish the Russian domination. One could argue that Russia was the successor of the Soviet state. I mean, Russia remained on the Security Council. Russia kept very many bilateral agreements Soviet Union had. For many Russians, collapse of the Soviet Union was the traumatizing experience, and I don't think that they got over the trauma. I think that what we observe today is the culmination. This is the end of that. However, Russian leaders perceived collapse of Soviet Union as a great historic mistake, and everything they've done up until this point, ever since the change of the course, was to correct the mistake. One can argue that they did everything opposite, and I personally would agree. We are now as far away from Soviet Union as we ever were. But the original intention was to, of course, fight the Western hegemony, to reestablish Soviet Union, and to reestablish, I would say, if not a bilateral world, then a world where Russian Federation, counting on its nuclear arsenal, would be making decisions on behalf of the European and not just continent.
So that's a great take, and I couldn't agree more on that. There is nothing to add on this, because we live in the age of the paradox of the plenty. Like there are so many information out there and so many experts and opinions, and so it's always good to talk to someone who knows what is going on in that region. So Putin was saying that the expansion of NATO was a warning sign. Okay, so it was warning sign, and it was an existential threat to Russia. And now we see there are quite the opposite result, which is a phenomenon which is being witnessed, like countries like Finland joining NATO. So do you think that Russia has a legitimate security concern in regard to NATO?
The very easy answer here is look at what Putin has done to Russia. I think that Putin devoured the Russian state. I think that the unprofessionalism and inadequacy never ceases to fascinate me. It is absolutely surreal to think that he thrown away all of the opportunities he had for nothing. If the aim or the objective was to control the expansion of NATO, then he not just failed, he caused the NATO expansion. From this point of view, I would argue that the biggest threat to Russian state is Putin himself. And I would argue that, like, in Ukraine, we had this joke for years. I mean, it's as if he is the CIA agent. It's as if he was put there to destroy Russia. And like, if you take a look at it from this point of view, suddenly things start making much more sense. I mean, he pretty much gifted the world a new chance to become westernly dominant. He wanted to bring Ukraine closer. This will not happen in foreseeable decades. He wanted Ukraine to be part of Russia. He wanted to rebuild USSR. But right now, because of the mobilization, because of the sudden changes in quality of life, Russia, like 100 years ago, is about to enter civil war. The borders of a Russian state might be changing very drastically in years to come. So technically, if there was the biggest threat to Russian state, unfortunately, this threat comes from within. I think that Putin is the number one threat to Russian state, and the consequences that are about to happen are immeasurable, and we have Russian government to thank that for.
What is your take on the Russians' occupation of the eastern part of? I think there are 3 or 4 regions. I'm not quite sure. You will correct me. And they're basically planning to hold a referendum in the coming weeks or days. So walk us through those that claim, and we will move to the recent announcement of Putin, where he said, "I'm not bluffing. I'm going to use any military weapons at Russia's disposal." So, anyways, what do you make of the referenda? Would that be considered as an achievement, or where will that take us?
I can sit here in Vienna and I can organize a virtual referendum in Ethiopia for Ethiopia to become part of Germany or whatever, and that would be as legitimate as what they're doing right now. They aren't even controlling the land. The reason why they're rushing so fast and they're attempting to have these online referendums right here, right now, is because they know that they're losing and they know that they're running out of time. This is a very desperate attempt to secure what they have, but they are doomed to fail. So, for example, there was Izum, and they wanted to have a referendum there, and they wanted to have this concert with the name, the theme of which was that Russia is here forever. Well, it turned out Russia is not there forever. Russia lost Izum, and the concert never happened. Ukraine will retake all of the occupied territories in the east, and Ukraine will have the Crimea back as well. Whatever they're doing right now, it doesn't make any difference anymore. It might have a temporary impact. So, for example, mobilization right now. I mean, technically, it just means that from a military point of view, will throwing 300 or 400,000 people without weapons, without any kind of proper equipment, without proper military training at the high marses, it doesn't change much.
So you are basically saying that since it suffers from a legitimacy deficit, it is not going to be sustainable. For the time being, they can hold a referenda, but it is illegitimate in the language of law and the politics. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, but on the other hand, I mean, what is nowadays legitimate? Technically, the constitution vote, the referendum on the constitution that Putin had just a year or two ago, it was unconstitutional. What they're doing with mobilization right now is unconstitutional. For example, they're trying to fine people who don't want to mobilize, but technically you can as well not pay a fine, because nowhere it says that you are obliged to pay this kind of fine in this kind of situation. So here I'm coming to this is perhaps a more of a philosophical question. I mean, what is legitimacy? To me personally, legitimacy is when you take the bite that you can swallow. If you cannot swallow, and if you cannot digest what you've just taken, it means you're bluffing. I think that this is the grand finale. I think that we're coming to the final Empire days. And I think that this was very visible on Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Technically, that was the biggest failure one could ever witness. And I think that, of course, mobilization was the reaction to this absolute disgrace that Putin experienced. So Putin once was one of the key figures, one of the most powerful politicians in the world. He once made, not once actually, he made Pope Francis wait hours to meet him. He would constantly be late to meetings. He would constantly be late to show who's in charge, figuratively speaking. And look at Putin now. I mean, everyone now makes him wait. I think that it was on a personal level. I think that this was devastating. I think he was lectured. I think that he felt uncomfortable. He had to come up with excuses why the special military operation that was meant to last 72 hours now lasts months, and there is no visible end. At least, like for Russia, there is no way out. And I think he knows. I think that as we're speaking, there is just such a level of anxiety because I think he knows that he's losing, and it's impossible to hide it anymore. So the only thing that's left is to try to not lose your face completely. And that's why he's sitting there and says, I'm not bluffing, I'm not bluffing, I'm not bluffing. But is he bluffing? Well, we're gonna know.
Actually,
Yes.
yeah, actually, there is an old saying that one who keeps promise shall never tell someone that he's keeping a secret. Sorry, and in the same way that if you are not bluffing, there is no need to say that I'm not bluffing. So this also tells something psychologically speaking. I'm not a psychologist, but I can sense that the fact that he's saying he's not bluffing also shows some level of desperation from his side. And so at what point, if any, Putin might use a nuclear weapon, be it tactical or strategic or limited range missile? Do you see any possibilities that he's not bluffing scenario may unfold in the near future? For example, let me give you a context. Now they are going to organize this illegitimate and illegal referenda. So and then Crimea is also there already. So do you think that the so-called territorial integrity doctrine of the usage of nuclear weapon doctrine, which you might be familiar with, it has been there since 2012. And recently in 2019, there was a little bit of interpretative revision, which says if the very existence of Russia and the territorial integrity is in question, then there is a possibility of using a nuclear weapon either as a first strike or to escalate the conventional war. So the war with Ukraine is a conventional war. So do you see that if this territory, let's say Ukraine army will retake those territory, do you think that that would be a ground for him to use a nuclear weapon? Or do you imagine any other scenario where the bluffing might turn out to be a reality for all of us? Do you see any nuclear winter, generally speaking?
While I can't say I expect a nuclear winter anytime soon, I would say that if there was ever a time to use a nuclear weapon, it's now. If I was to be him, I would use it now. Like if you said you're not bluffing, well, the least you can do is show. Strategically, again, will it change anything? No. I think that this is a lost cause. I don't expect. I wouldn't say that it would be smart to commit to using nuclear weapons as a response to a use of a nuclear weapon. The way I see it, Putin has postponed his mobilization announcement from originally the evening to the next morning. And I think that while this may seem insignificant, I think that this actually means that he is very, very uncertain of what to do next and how to proceed. And I think it's very important for us to understand that he is afraid. From this point of view, do you know in interviews through 90s, he would tell a story how he would corner a rat and the rat would suddenly start fighting very aggressively, and he would recall that he was amazed how much like the small animal can do when it's cornered. We have to understand that we've cornered Putin. He has nowhere else to go, and given the fact that he is mentally inadequate, there is a probability that we will see nuclear weapons used in weeks to come. Strategically, it will not change a single thing. Russia will still lose the war.
Yeah. Maybe I remember, that I have seen the level of reactions from the international community, outrage in the UN Security, UN General Assembly. And the United States, basically all major powers have responded or reacted to Putin's announcement, where specifically President Joe Biden reaffirmed the old doctrine that the nuclear weapon, nobody will win a nuclear war, so that it shall never be fought. Okay, so that was a reaffirmation. Let's end with that optimistic view, because nobody wants us to see a total annihilation or a nuclear winter. So,
bluff or not, Putin said that we don't need a world in which there is no Russia. Just saying.
So maybe that would show an extreme level of irrationality seen from Putin's perspective. It could be rational for him, but let's see if I wish only for the best, and I wish also all the best for the Ukrainian people. And we will definitely have part 2 of this podcast, as we said, what is going to happen, what shall we do. We haven't even discussed about the way out, so
they can't stop here. So their only way is to move forward, to continue. And I'm afraid there will be more destruction to come. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it is a great pleasure to have you. That this is always, informally speaking, this is the first time that we have organized an episode or a podcast. We always have had a very intense at times, but good discussions, and I'm so fascinated with the level of articulation and the deep knowledge that you have, of course, obviously about the region and the dynamics and the structural issues involved there, including some philosophical issues. So we will have part 2 next week, and we promise this to our audience. And I will also fix the technical difficulties that I faced today. And with that, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to have you. And I wish all the best to you and the people of Ukraine who are defending their identity.
All
Thanks
the
very
best
much.
to you. All the best to Ethiopia. Bye bye.